The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Grandview Ballroom, sending crystal shards across designer heels and polished Oxfords. Every conversation at the Bellridge Chamber of Commerce annual gala stopped mid-sentence. The string ensemble on the elevated stage missed several notes in unison. 200 of Millhaven's most influential business leaders turned toward table 7 where Helena Morrison-Chen stood frozen, her hand still extended from where she'd been reaching for her drink, staring at the woman who had just destroyed her family's reputation with a single, devastating sentence. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. That's the moment everything shifted. Not when Margaret Chen, Helena's sister-in-law, delivered the crushing blow in front of the entire business community, but when the silence afterwards settled like toxic fog over the grand ballroom. Because while everyone expected tears, dramatic exits, or at least a slapped face, Helena simply smiled, picked up the microphone from the awards podium beside their table, and said, "Thank you, Margaret, for making this so much easier for everyone to see the truth." What nobody knew, especially Margaret and the Chen family empire, was that Helena had been planning this moment for 10 months. And in exactly 43 minutes, Margaret's phone would start ringing with the first of 247 calls that would systematically destroy everything the Chen family had built their legacy on, piece by carefully orchestrated piece. Before we dive back into this incredible story of family betrayal and business warfare, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories of standing up to family bullies resonate with you. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story involves a mother-in-law who thought she could steal her daughter-in-law's inheritance, but learned a very expensive lesson about underestimating the wrong woman. Helena Morrison-Chen, formerly Helena Morrison before she took his name like some kind of victory trophy, had built Morrison Digital Solutions from the ground up while her husband David played supporting husband to her entrepreneurial dreams and worked his day job at Riverside Medical Center. She was the one pulling 18-hour days, landing the major tech contracts, managing the development teams, and turning a small web design startup into a multi-million-dollar digital marketing empire that served Fortune 500 companies. The company bore her maiden name because, as Helena often had to remind people at networking events, "I built it before I got married, and I'm not erasing my identity for anyone's comfort." But David had always supported that decision, understanding that his wife's brilliance deserved recognition, not concealment. For 8 years, she'd built the perfect life. A thriving business, a supportive husband who celebrated her success rather than feeling threatened by it, and what she believed was a loving extended family who welcomed her into their fold. At family gatherings, David's mother Margaret Chen would praise Helena's accomplishments and tell everyone how proud she was to have such a successful daughter-in-law. His father, Robert Chen, would introduce Helena to his golf club friends as the brilliant entrepreneur who's putting our family on the map. David's younger brother, Michael Chen, would ask Helena for business advice and seemed genuinely interested in learning from her experience, but 10 months ago, something had shifted. It started subtle, barely noticeable at first. A casual comment from Margaret about how family businesses should really stay in the family name. A suggestion from Robert that Helena might want to consider bringing David in as a co-owner for tax purposes and estate planning. Michael's sudden interest in digital marketing and his pointed questions about Helena's client contracts, pricing strategies, and business development processes. Helena wasn't naive. She'd built a successful business by reading people and situations accurately. But when the people involved were family, when they were the people who'd welcomed her into their home for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, when they were the grandparents she'd hoped would someday spoil her and David's future children, she'd wanted to believe their intentions were pure. The first real warning sign came during a family barbecue in July. Helena had been showing Margaret some photos from a recent business conference when she noticed Michael Chen quickly closing his laptop screen as she approached. Later, when she went inside to help with dessert, she overheard Robert on the phone in his study, speaking in hushed tones about intellectual property transfers and family asset consolidation. When she asked David about it later, he dismissed her concerns with characteristic optimism, saying his family was probably just planning some kind of surprise for their upcoming wedding anniversary. David Chen was the kind of man who saw the best in everyone, especially his family. He adored his parents, respected his younger brother, and genuinely believed that family loyalty was one of life's most important values. Helena loved that about him, even when it occasionally frustrated her. David's unwavering faith in his family's good intentions was part of what made him such a loving husband. But it also made him blind to the possibility that those same family members might not have Helena's best interests at heart. The second warning sign came in August when Helena discovered that Michael Chen had registered a Delaware corporation. called Chen Digital Enterprises, with remarkably similar services to Morrison Digital Solutions. When she confronted David about it, he'd explained that Michael was probably just exploring entrepreneurship and had chosen a similar business model because he admired Helena's success. "He looks up to you," David had said with genuine warmth. "He's trying to follow in your footsteps." But Helena's business instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Michael wasn't just exploring entrepreneurship. He was systematically studying her business model, her client base, her pricing structure, and her operational strategies. The questions he'd been asking weren't the curiosity of an aspiring entrepreneur. They were the research inquiries of someone conducting competitive intelligence. The third warning sign was impossible to ignore. In September, Helena discovered that 3 of her major clients had been contacted by representatives from Chen Digital Enterprises offering identical services at significantly reduced rates. The representatives had detailed knowledge of Helena's contracts, project timelines, and client-specific challenges that could only have come from inside information. When Helena presented this evidence to David, she watched his expression shift from disbelief to confusion to something approaching betrayal. For the first time in their marriage, David had to confront the possibility that his family wasn't as loving and supportive as he'd always believed. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours and ended with David making a choice that would define their marriage. He chose to stand with his wife against his family. "I don't know what they're planning," David had said, holding Helena's hands across their kitchen table, "but whatever it is, we'll face it together. You built something incredible, and I won't let anyone take that away from you, even if they share my DNA." That conversation was 10 months ago. And tonight, at the Grandview Ballroom, surrounded by Millhaven's business elite, Margaret Chen had just made the mistake of underestimating exactly how prepared Helena Morrison-Chen could be when she had 10 months to plan and a husband who chose love over blood. The champagne was still being cleaned up from the marble floor, but the real mess was just beginning. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. For 8 years, Helena Morrison-Chen had been the perfect daughter-in-law in the Chen family dynasty. She attended every Sunday dinner at the family's sprawling estate in Elmwood Heights, contributed homemade desserts to holiday celebrations, and listened with genuine interest to Robert Chen's endless stories about building his commercial real estate empire from nothing. She'd learned Mandarin phrases to communicate better with David's grandmother, helped Margaret organize charity fundraisers for the Millhaven Children's Hospital, and even designed the website for Michael's failed attempt at a food truck business. 3 years earlier, the Chen family had welcomed her with what seemed like genuine warmth when she and David started dating in college. Margaret would call her "my daughter" at family gatherings, often saying she was grateful David had found someone so accomplished and driven. Robert would proudly introduce Helena to his business associates, describing her as the entrepreneur who's going to put our family on the digital map. Even Michael, despite being 6 years younger and notoriously difficult to impress, seemed to genuinely admire Helena's business acumen and often asked her advice about his various entrepreneurial ventures, but there had always been an undercurrent of something Helena couldn't quite identify. It manifested in small ways that seemed insignificant individually but formed a pattern over time. Margaret's habit of referring to Helena's business as her little company, despite Morrison Digital Solutions employing 47 people and generating 8-figure annual revenue. Robert's tendency to ask Helena when she planned to scale back and focus on family, even though she and David had never discussed having children on any particular timeline. Michael's persistent questions about whether Helena would ever consider bringing the business into the family through some kind of partnership or merger. Helena had initially interpreted these comments as the natural curiosity of family members who wanted to understand and support her work. The Chen family had built their wealth through traditional industries, real estate, manufacturing, import-export operations, and Helena assumed they simply didn't understand the digital marketing world well enough to appreciate the scope and sophistication of what she'd built. David, for his part, had always been Helena's strongest advocate within his family. When Margaret would make comments about Helena working too much, David would gently remind his mother that Helena's dedication was what made her successful. When Robert would suggest that Helena might want to slow down and enjoy life, David would point out that Helena loved her work and found fulfillment in building something meaningful. When Michael would hint that family businesses were stronger when they stayed within family names, David would firmly state that Helena had built Morrison Digital Solutions before their marriage and deserved full credit for her accomplishments. The dynamic had worked for years because Helena genuinely loved David's family and wanted to maintain harmony. She'd grown up as an only child with distant parents who viewed her achievements as resume items rather than sources of pride. The Chen family's apparent warmth and interest in her life had filled an emotional void she hadn't even realized existed. She wanted to believe that Margaret's occasional suggestions about business restructuring came from a place of caring. She wanted to interpret Robert's questions about family planning as grandparental excitement rather than subtle pressure. She wanted to see Michael's curiosity about her business operations as the natural interest of a younger brother-in-law, who looked up to her success, but by year 6 of their marriage, the undercurrent had become harder to ignore. Margaret began making more direct comments about how family wealth should be protected through proper estate planning and how successful couples often benefit from combining their business interests. Robert started suggesting that Helena might want to consider bringing David in as an official partner in Morrison Digital Solutions, arguing that family businesses have better succession planning and tax advantages. Michael's questions became more pointed and specific, focusing on client lists, proprietary methodologies, and strategic plans rather than general business curiosity. Helena had tried discussing these concerns with David, but his response was always the same: his family loved her and wanted to see her succeed. They were probably just trying to be helpful in the only way they knew how. His parents had built successful businesses through family partnerships, so they naturally assumed that model would work for everyone. Michael was young and ambitious, and his interest in Helena's business was flattery, not threat. The Chen family's approach was masterfully subtle. They never made direct demands or issued ultimatums. Instead, they planted seeds of suggestion and let them grow over time. They framed their interest in Helena's business as concern for her welfare and the family's financial security. They positioned their questions as helpful advice from experienced business owners who wanted to share their wisdom. They made Helena feel ungrateful and paranoid for questioning motives that appeared, on the surface, to be completely benevolent. What Helena didn't understand until much later was that the Chen family had been conducting their own form of strategic planning. While she was building her business and trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, they were quietly assessing the value of what she'd created and determining how to acquire it for themselves. Morrison Digital Solutions wasn't just a successful business in their eyes, it was an asset that could be absorbed into the Chen family empire if they played their cards correctly. The family dinners where Helena shared updates about major contracts weren't expressions of familial interest, they were intelligence-gathering sessions. Margaret's questions about Helena's stress levels and work-life balance weren't concerned inquiries from a caring mother-in-law, they were attempts to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited later. Robert's suggestions about business partnerships weren't advice from an experienced entrepreneur. They were the opening moves in a long-term acquisition strategy. Most devastatingly, Michael's admiration for Helena's success wasn't the genuine respect of a younger family member learning from her example. It was the calculated attention of someone studying a business model he intended to replicate and improve upon. Every question he asked, every piece of advice he sought, every friendly conversation about digital marketing strategy was part of a comprehensive competitive intelligence operation designed to give him the knowledge he needed to launch a direct competitor to Morrison Digital Solutions. The Chen family had been playing a completely different game than Helena realized. While she was focused on building relationships and maintaining family harmony, they were conducting corporate espionage disguised as family bonding. While she was sharing her successes because she thought they cared about her achievements, they were collecting information they could use to undermine those same achievements. While she was trying to be generous with her knowledge and experience, they were systematically gathering everything they needed to destroy what she'd built. The most painful realization, when it finally came, was that her 8 years of perfect daughter-in-law behavior hadn't earned her genuine love and acceptance from David's family. It had simply given them extended access to study her vulnerabilities and plan their attack. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday celebration, every family gathering where Helena had felt welcomed and valued had actually been an opportunity for the Chen family to get closer to their ultimate goal, taking everything she'd worked for and making it their own. But Helena Morrison-Chen hadn't built a multi-million-dollar business by being naive about human nature. And when she finally understood what game the Chen family was really playing, she decided it was time to show them that they'd chosen the wrong opponent. The moment that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday morning in September, exactly 10 months before the Grandview Ballroom incident. Helena was running late for a client presentation with Pinnacle Tech Solutions, one of Morrison Digital Solutions' most valuable accounts, when she realized she'd left her presentation files on her home computer. David had already left for his shift at Riverside Medical Center, but she still had her key and decided to quickly swing by the house to grab what she needed. As she pulled into their driveway, Helena noticed Michael's distinctive red Tesla parked across the street, which was odd since David had mentioned the night before that Michael was supposed to be in Chicago for a trade show until Thursday. She almost called out to him as she headed to the front door, but something made her pause. Michael was sitting in his car with the engine running, talking animatedly on his phone while staring directly at their house. Helena slipped inside quietly, grabbed her files from the home office, and was heading back to her car when she heard Michael's voice clearly through his slightly open window. What she heard made her blood freeze in her veins. "No, she just went inside," Michael was saying. "David left for work 20 minutes ago, so she's alone. This is perfect timing. Yes, I'm sure she doesn't suspect anything. She still thinks I'm in Chicago. The client meeting is at 10, which gives us at least 2 hours before she gets back." Helena ducked behind her neighbor's hedge, her heart pounding as Michael continued his conversation. "The security system code is still the same, Helena's birthday. David mentioned it last Sunday when Mom was complaining about forgetting her own alarm code." "What do you mean, is it worth the risk? We've been planning this for months. The presentation files are exactly what we need to complete the proposal. Once we have her proprietary algorithms and client strategy documents, Chen Digital Enterprises, we'll be ready to launch." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. This wasn't a coincidence or a casual family visit. Michael was coordinating a break-in of her own home to steal her business files while she was at a client meeting. The trade show in Chicago was an alibi. The family's recent interest in her home security system wasn't friendly concern, it was reconnaissance. Helena watched in horror as a white van pulled up behind Michael's Tesla. 2 men she didn't recognize got out, along with someone who made her stomach drop, Robert Chen, David's father, carrying what appeared to be professional document scanning equipment. Margaret emerged last, holding a clipboard and what looked like a detailed floor plan of Helena and David's house. "She keeps the really sensitive files in the home office," Margaret was saying as the group approached Helena's front door. "Second floor, corner room. Everything should be in the filing cabinet marked MDS proprietary, and on her personal computer. Michael, you handle the digital files. Robert, you scan the hard copies. I'll photograph anything we can't take without her noticing." Helena remained hidden, pulling out her phone to record everything as the Chen family proceeded to break into her home with the efficiency of a professional espionage team. They knew exactly where to find her security panel, exactly which files to target, and exactly how to avoid leaving obvious evidence of their intrusion. 25 minutes later, they emerged with several boxes of documents, multiple USB drives, and what appeared to be a portable hard drive containing copies of Helena's computer files. Helena watched Margaret make notes on her clipboard, apparently cataloging everything they'd stolen, while Robert loaded the scanning equipment back into the van. "Phase 1 complete," Michael said into his phone as they prepared to leave. "We now have everything we need for competitive analysis and client approach strategies. Phase 2 can begin as soon as the lawyers confirm the partnership dissolution framework is legally sound." Partnership dissolution framework. The words hit Helena like a physical blow. This wasn't just corporate espionage, this was a coordinated plan to steal her business intelligence and use it to destroy Morrison Digital Solutions while simultaneously forcing her out of her own company. As the Chen family caravan disappeared down her street, Helena sat in her car trying to process what she'd just witnessed. The people she'd considered family for 8 years had just burglarized her home to steal the proprietary business information she'd spent a decade developing. They'd used their intimate knowledge of her life, her schedule, her security systems, and her trust to conduct what was essentially a corporate heist, but the betrayal went deeper than theft. The casual mention of partnership dissolution framework suggested they'd been working with lawyers to find ways to legally force Helena out of her own business. The coordinated timing with her client meetings showed they'd been monitoring her schedule for weeks, possibly months. The professional-grade equipment and detailed planning indicated this wasn't an impulsive decision, it was part of a long-term strategy to systematically acquire everything Helena had built. Helena drove to her client meeting in a daze, somehow managing to deliver her presentation to Pinnacle Tech Solutions while her mind raced through the implications of what she'd discovered. Every family dinner where she'd shared business updates suddenly took on a sinister meaning. Every casual question about her operations was now revealed as intelligence gathering. Every suggestion about family business partnerships was exposed as manipulation designed to position the Chen family for a hostile takeover. That evening, when David came home from his shift at the hospital, Helena faced the most difficult conversation of their marriage. She had to tell the man she loved that his family, the people who'd raised him, supported him, and earned his unwavering loyalty, had spent months planning to destroy her life's work and steal everything she'd built. David's initial reaction was exactly what Helena had expected, complete disbelief followed by desperate attempts to find alternative explanations. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe Michael had legitimate business reasons for being at their house. Maybe the break-in was unrelated to her family. Maybe she'd misinterpreted what she'd overheard, but Helena had recorded everything on her phone. She had video evidence of the Chen family breaking into their home, audio recordings of their conversations about stealing her files, and timestamps that proved the coordinated nature of their operation. There was no ambiguity, no room for alternative interpretations, and no possibility that this was anything other than a calculated attack on Helena's business. The hardest part wasn't convincing David that his family had betrayed Helena, it was watching him realize that they'd betrayed him too. By using his trust, his house key, his knowledge of their security system, and his intimate details about Helena's schedule, the Chen family had made David an unwitting accomplice in their corporate espionage. They'd exploited his love for both his wife and his family to gain the access they needed to steal everything Helena had worked for. They used me, David said quietly, staring at the recordings on Helena's phone. They used our marriage, our home, our trust. They made me help them hurt you without even knowing I was doing it. That night, as they sat in their violated home surrounded by evidence of his family's betrayal, David made the choice that would define their marriage and their future. He chose Helena. Not just in the moment, but strategically and permanently. He chose to help her fight back against his own family rather than trying to find middle ground or maintain neutrality. Whatever you need to do to protect yourself and your business, David said, holding Helena's hands across their kitchen table, I'm with you completely. They want to play dirty with corporate espionage and family manipulation? Fine. But they made one critical mistake, they assumed I would choose blood over love when the time came to pick sides. Helena looked at her husband, the man who just discovered his family's capacity for betrayal and manipulation, and realized she wasn't fighting this battle alone. She had an ally who understood the Chen family's methods, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities better than anyone else alive. An ally who was willing to use that knowledge to protect what she'd built, even if it meant destroying his relationship with his family forever. The Chen family had made a catastrophic error in judgment. They'd assumed David would remain loyal to them regardless of how they treated his wife. Instead, their betrayal had created the one thing Helena needed most, a partner who was as committed to their destruction as they were to hers. Over the following weeks, Helena and David embarked on the most meticulous investigation either of them had ever conducted. What started as an attempt to understand the scope of the Chen family's betrayal quickly evolved into something resembling a counterintelligence operation, with Helena applying the same analytical skills she used for digital marketing campaigns. To uncover the full extent of her in-laws' corporate espionage, David proved to be an invaluable asset in ways Helena hadn't anticipated. His intimate knowledge of his family's habits, schedules, and communication patterns allowed them to predict and monitor the Chen family's activities without arousing suspicion. More importantly, his access to family information through seemingly innocent conversations provided Helena with intelligence she could never have gathered on her own. The first breakthrough came when David casually mentioned to Michael that he was thinking about upgrading their home security system. Michael's response was immediate and suspicious. He suggested David wait a few months before making any changes, claiming that new security technology was coming out that would be much better. When David pressed for details, Michael became evasive and quickly changed the subject. The interaction confirmed Helena's suspicion that the Chen family was planning additional intrusions and needed continued access to their current system. Helena decided to test this theory by strategically leaving false information where the Chen family could find it. She created fake client files detailing a fictional major contract with Quantum Industries, a made-up tech giant supposedly based in Seattle. The files included detailed project timelines, budget information, and strategic plans for a digital transformation initiative worth $12 million. Helena then mentioned the Quantum project, casually during a family dinner, watching carefully for reactions. Margaret's eyes lit up with interest when Helena described the project's scope and budget. Robert began asking pointed questions about Quantum's decision-making process and timeline for vendor selection. Most tellingly, Michael started inquiring about Helena's travel schedule and whether she'd be working from home more often to manage such a large project. Within a week, Helena's home security system recorded another break-in attempt, this time focused specifically on finding files related to the non-existent Quantum Industries contract, but the Chen family's investigation efforts went far beyond simple burglary. David discovered that Michael had been systematically contacting Helena's former employees, clients, and business associates under various pretenses. He'd posed as a potential investor conducting due diligence on Morrison Digital Solutions, a graduate student researching successful entrepreneurship case studies, and even a journalist writing an article about women in tech. In each case, Michael had gathered detailed information about Helena's business practices, client relationships, and proprietary methodologies. The scope of Michael's intelligence gathering was staggering. He'd obtained copies of Morrison Digital Solutions client contracts through a former employee who'd been laid off 6 months earlier and harbored resentment about his termination. He'd accessed Helena's vendor agreements by befriending a supplier who thought he was helping a potential new client. He'd even convinced one of Helena's current employees to share internal project management tools by claiming he was Helena's cousin working on a surprise appreciation gift for her upcoming birthday. David's investigation revealed that Robert Chen had been conducting his own parallel research through his extensive business network. As a prominent figure in Millhaven's commercial real estate community, Robert had connections throughout the local business ecosystem. He'd been systematically gathering intelligence about Morrison Digital Solutions' financial performance, growth trajectory, and market position by leveraging relationships with bankers, accountants, and other service providers who worked with both companies. Margaret's contribution to the family espionage operation was perhaps the most insidious. She'd been using her social connections and charity work to gather personal information about Helena that could be used to undermine her professionally. Margaret had discovered which of Helena's clients were also involved in the various non-profit organizations she supported, and she'd been carefully cultivating relationships with those individuals while gradually planting seeds of doubt about Helena's reliability and business practices. The investigation also revealed that the Chen family's plans extended far beyond simple competitive intelligence. David found documents in his parents' home office detailing a comprehensive strategy to not only steal Helena's business model but to actively destroy Morrison Digital Solutions' reputation in the marketplace. The plan included coordinated negative reviews on industry websites, strategic rumors about Helena's business practices spread through professional networks, and even a proposed smear campaign targeting Helena's largest clients with false allegations about data security breaches and project failures. Most shocking was the discovery that the Chen family had been planning their attack for nearly 2 years, long before Helena had any indication that something was wrong. David found emails between his parents and Michael dating back to Helena's most successful year, when Morrison Digital Solutions had landed several major Fortune 500 contracts and achieved record-breaking revenue growth. The emails revealed that the Chen family's initial motivation wasn't business opportunity but resentment. They couldn't tolerate Helena's success overshadowing their own family business achievements. The emails contained casual but revealing comments about Helena's uppity attitude and her forgetting her place in the family hierarchy. Margaret had written extensively about how Helena's success was making other family members look bad and how it was inappropriate for a daughter-in-law to be more successful than the established family business. Robert had complained that Helena's public recognition was diminishing the Chen family's standing in the business community and that something needed to be done to restore proper balance. David was devastated to discover that his family's resentment toward Helena wasn't based on any specific offense or conflict. It was simply their inability to accept that she was more successful than they were. The people he'd loved and respected his entire life had been consumed by jealousy to the point where they were willing to commit corporate espionage and fraud to tear down the woman he'd married. But the investigation also revealed something that gave Helena hope. The Chen family's plan had critical weaknesses. Their strategy relied heavily on secrecy and Helena's continued trust and ignorance. They'd invested months of effort in gathering intelligence and positioning themselves for attack. But they'd made no preparations for the possibility that Helena might discover their activities and fight back. More importantly, they'd made the catastrophic assumption that David would remain loyal to them regardless of how they treated his wife. Helena realized that the Chen family's greatest strength, their intimate knowledge of her life and business, could also become their greatest vulnerability if she could turn that access against them. They knew her routines, her security systems, her business practices, and her personal relationships. But Helena knew something even more valuable. She knew that they didn't know she knew. The investigation phase had taken 6 weeks and revealed a conspiracy that was larger, more sophisticated, and more vindictive than Helena had imagined. But it had also given her something precious, a complete understanding of her enemy's capabilities, motivations, and plans. The Chen family thought they were hunting Helena, systematically gathering the intelligence they needed to destroy her business and reputation. What they didn't realize was that Helena had been hunting them right back, and she was much better at it than they were. While they'd been focused on stealing her business model, she'd been mapping their entire operation. While they'd been planning her destruction, she'd been identifying their vulnerabilities. While they'd been preparing to attack, she'd been preparing to annihilate them so completely that they'd never recover. The investigation phase was complete. Now it was time for Helena to show the Chen family what happened when you tried to steal from someone who was smarter, more ruthless, and better prepared than you'd ever imagined possible. The hunters were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong prey. While the Chen family continued their espionage operation, believing they held all the advantages, Helena began implementing a counter-strategy so sophisticated and comprehensive that it made their amateur-hour corporate theft look like children playing dress-up in boardroom suits. The investigation phase had given her something invaluable, a complete understanding of their methods, timeline, and vulnerabilities. Now it was time to turn those vulnerabilities into weapons. Helena's first move was to compartmentalize her real business operations from anything the Chen family could access. Working with David, she established what she privately called Operation Firewall, a systematic process of creating decoy information while protecting her actual business intelligence. Every document the Chen family had stolen or could potentially steal was either outdated, incomplete, or completely fabricated. Meanwhile, Helena moved all legitimate business operations to secure systems that only she could access. The genius of Helena's approach was that she didn't try to prevent the Chen family's espionage, she controlled it. Instead of changing her security codes or upgrading her home office protection, she carefully curated what information was available for them to steal. Helena created an entire fictional version of Morrison Digital Solutions operations, complete with fake client contracts, fabricated project timelines, and deliberately flawed business strategies that would lead Chen Digital Enterprises directly into expensive failures. David proved to be an extraordinary asset in this deception campaign. His medical training had taught him to pay attention to details and follow protocols precisely, skills that translated perfectly to counterintelligence work. More importantly, his genuine emotional distress about his family's betrayal made his performance completely convincing. When he attended family dinners, his hurt and confusion were real, which meant the Chen family never suspected he was working with Helena to feed them false information. Helena's second strategic move was to begin documenting everything. But unlike the Chen family's crude evidence gathering, Helena's documentation was legally bulletproof and strategically comprehensive. She hired Meridian Security Solutions, a private investigation firm specializing in corporate espionage cases, to conduct professional surveillance of the Chen family's activities. Every break-in, every intelligence gathering attempt, every contact with Helena's employees or clients was recorded with timestamps, locations, and detailed evidence that would hold up in any legal proceeding. The surveillance revealed just how extensive the Chen family's operation had become. Michael was making an average of 15 intelligence gathering contacts per week, systematically working through lists of Helena's business associates and trying different approaches when initial attempts failed. Margaret was attending an average of 3 social events per week where she could potentially encounter Helena's clients or professional contacts. Robert was leveraging his business relationships almost daily to gather financial intelligence about Morrison Digital Solutions, but Helena's documentation went beyond simple surveillance. Working with David, she began recording family conversations, using sophisticated audio equipment that was virtually undetectable. Every family dinner, every casual phone call, every seemingly innocent interaction where the Chen family discussed their plans was captured in high-definition audio that clearly demonstrated their criminal conspiracy. Helena was building a legal case that would be absolutely devastating when she chose to deploy it. Helena's third strategic initiative was to begin actively sabotaging Chen Digital Enterprises before they could launch their attack on Morrison Digital Solutions. Using the intelligence she'd gathered about their business model and client targeting strategies, Helena began a subtle campaign to undermine their credibility and positioning in the marketplace. She started by using her professional network to spread carefully crafted information about Chen Digital Enterprises that was technically truthful but strategically damaging. Helena mentioned to key industry contacts that she'd heard about a new competitor that seemed to be using remarkably similar methodologies to established firms, raising questions about their originality and innovation capabilities. She shared concerns about companies that relied heavily on competitive intelligence rather than developing their own proprietary approaches. The beauty of Helena's sabotage campaign was that it never involved direct lies or unethical behavior. She simply shared truthful observations and let industry professionals draw their own conclusions. When Michael approached potential clients using strategies he'd stolen from Morrison Digital Solutions, those clients had already been primed to recognize the approaches as derivative and unoriginal. When Chen Digital Enterprises made proposals that closely resembled Helena's work, industry insiders were already suspicious about their business practices. Helena also began strategically strengthening her relationships with her most valuable clients, not by badmouthing potential competitors but by demonstrating increased value and innovation. She launched new service offerings that went beyond anything the Chen family had stolen, making their copied strategies obsolete before they could be implemented. She developed exclusive partnerships with technology vendors that would make it impossible for competitors to replicate her capabilities. David's role in this phase of the operation was particularly crucial. His access to family planning sessions allowed Helena to stay ahead of the Chen family's moves by weeks or sometimes months. When the family decided to target specific clients, Helena could strengthen those relationships before any approach was made. When they planned to spread rumors about Morrison Digital Solutions, Helena could preemptively address Concerns with her professional network. When they prepared to launch new attacks, Helena could already be implementing defensive measures. The psychological aspect of Helena's strategy was perhaps the most sophisticated element. She began using her knowledge of the Chen family's personalities and motivations to manipulate their decision-making processes. Through David, she fed them information that encouraged them to make strategically poor choices while believing they were being clever. For instance, Helena knew that Michael's ego was his greatest weakness. Through carefully planted information, she encouraged him to believe that Helena's success was based on luck and timing rather than skill and innovation. This led Michael to underestimate the complexity of digital marketing and make fundamental errors in his business planning. Helena guided him toward high-profile client targets that she knew would be disasters for his inexperienced team, while steering him away from opportunities where he might actually succeed. Margaret's weakness was her need to appear socially superior and well-connected. Helena used this against her by creating situations where Margaret's attempts to undermine Helena actually backfired and made Margaret look petty and jealous to their shared social circle. Helena began volunteering for higher-profile charity events and accepting speaking engagements that elevated her public profile, making Margaret's subtle criticisms seem obviously motivated by resentment. Robert's vulnerability was his pride in being a strategic business thinker. Helena fed him complex financial information that was technically accurate but led to incorrect conclusions about Morrison Digital Solutions' vulnerabilities. This encouraged Robert to focus the family's attacks on areas where Helena was actually strongest while ignoring her real weaknesses. Helena's counter-strategy also included building a network of allies who could provide early warning about the Chen family's activities. She carefully cultivated relationships with key figures in Millhaven's business community who naturally came into contact with the Chen family's intelligence-gathering efforts. These allies didn't know about the family conflict, but they were positioned to alert Helena if anyone was asking unusual questions about her business or personal life. By the end of the 8-month preparation period, Helena had transformed herself from a victim of corporate espionage into the conductor of an elaborate counterintelligence operation. The Chen family believed they were closing in on their target, gathering the final pieces of intelligence they needed to destroy Morrison Digital Solutions and steal its market position. What they didn't realize was that Helena had been feeding them false information, documenting their crimes, sabotaging their preparations, and positioning herself for a counterattack that would be absolutely devastating. The most beautiful aspect of Helena's strategy was that the Chen family's own arrogance and assumptions had made them completely vulnerable to her manipulation. They were so confident in their superior planning and family coordination that they never considered the possibility that Helena might be more intelligent, more strategic, and more ruthless than they were. They saw her continued trust and family participation as evidence that their deception was working perfectly. In reality, Helena's continued participation in family events was intelligence gathering. Her apparent ignorance of their activities was strategic misdirection. Her seeming vulnerability was actually the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards and was simply waiting for the perfect moment to play them. The Chen family had spent months preparing to destroy Helena Morrison-Chen. They had no idea that Helena Morrison-Chen had spent those same months preparing to destroy them so completely that they would never recover. The Bellridge Chamber of Commerce annual gala was supposed to be Margaret Chen's moment of triumph. She had spent weeks coordinating with Michael and Robert to ensure that Helena would be publicly humiliated in front of Millhaven's entire business community, setting the stage for Chen Digital Enterprises to emerge as the credible alternative to Morrison Digital Solutions. What Margaret didn't know was that Helena had been planning for this exact moment for 10 months, and every detail of the evening had been carefully orchestrated to give the Chen family enough rope to hang themselves. Helena arrived at the Grandview Ballroom wearing a midnight blue dress that radiated confidence and authority, accompanied by David who looked every inch the supportive husband. They made their way through the cocktail reception, greeting clients and business associates with the warm professionalism that had made Helena one of Millhaven's most respected entrepreneurs. To any observer, they appeared to be a successful couple enjoying a prestigious social event, but Helena's calm demeanor masked the precision of a military operation. Hidden throughout the ballroom were strategically positioned allies who would serve as witnesses to whatever the Chen family attempted. Helena's assistant, Rachel Martinez, was stationed near the registration table with professional recording equipment disguised as standard event photography gear. Thomas Blackwood from Meridian Security Solutions was positioned at the bar with surveillance equipment that could capture audio and video from anywhere in the ballroom. Even Helena's attorney, Catherine Walsh from Pinnacle Legal Group, was present as a guest, ready to document any criminal behavior or slanderous statements. David's role that evening was perhaps the most challenging of all. He had to appear genuinely surprised by his family's actions while simultaneously being prepared to support Helena's response. The emotional toll of the previous 10 months had been devastating for him, watching his family plot against his wife. While maintaining the facade of loving relationships had pushed David to his psychological limits. But tonight, all of that preparation would finally pay off. The Chen family had positioned themselves strategically throughout the ballroom, clearly coordinating their movements through discreet text messages and subtle signals. Michael was working the room, engaging prominent business leaders in conversations about the exciting new developments in digital marketing that would soon be announced. Robert was focused on Helena's major clients, particularly the executives from Pinnacle Tech Solutions and Quantum Dynamics, planting seeds of concern about Morrison Digital Solutions' future reliability. Margaret was holding court near the awards podium, preparing for what she clearly believed would be her moment of ultimate victory. The trigger came during the dinner portion of the evening, when Chamber President Elizabeth Harper invited Margaret to the podium to present the award for Outstanding Family Business Contribution to Community Development. It was an honor that Margaret had lobbied heavily to receive, partly for the recognition but primarily because it would give her a platform to deliver what she'd planned as Helena's public destruction. Margaret approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. She began her speech with gracious thanks and acknowledgments, gradually building toward what everyone in the Chen family knew would be the evening's climactic moment. Helena sat at table 7, hands folded calmly in her lap, watching Margaret with the serene attention of someone watching a performance they'd written themselves. Family businesses, Margaret continued, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, are built on trust, loyalty, and shared values. They represent the best of what we can accomplish when we work together toward common goals. She paused, her eyes finding Helena in the audience with predatory precision. But sometimes, family members can become confused about their roles and responsibilities. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the speech was taking an unexpected turn. Helena maintained her calm expression, even offering Margaret an encouraging smile that seemed to fuel the older woman's confidence. I'm speaking specifically about situations where family members begin to think they're more important than the family unit itself, Margaret continued, her voice growing sharper. Where individual ego and personal ambition begin to overshadow family loyalty and respect for established hierarchies. David reached for Helena's hand under the table, his fingers tense with anticipation. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. Margaret's attempt to publicly humiliate Helena would trigger the systematic destruction of the Chen family that Helena had been orchestrating for 10 months. Margaret's voice rose as she reached her planned climax. I'm talking about daughters-in-law who forget their place in the family structure, who become so intoxicated by their own minor successes that they begin to think they're superior to the family members who welcome them with open arms. The ballroom fell silent, with even the waitstaff stopping their movements to listen. Helena Morrison-Chen, you are an embarrassment to the Chen family name, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending otherwise. The champagne glass slipped from someone's hand at a nearby table, shattering against the marble floor with a crystal crash that seemed to punctuate Margaret's statement. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 of Millhaven's business elite sitting in stunned silence as they processed what they'd just witnessed. Helena stood slowly, her movement drawing every eye in the ballroom. She walked toward the podium with measured steps, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. When she reached Margaret, who was still gripping the microphone with white knuckles, Helena gently took the device from her hands. Thank you, Margaret, Helena said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Thank you for making this so much easier for everyone to see the truth. Helena pulled out her phone, opened a specific app, and tapped a single button. Instantly, large screens throughout the ballroom came to life, displaying what appeared to be a professional presentation titled, Chen Family Corporate Espionage, a comprehensive documentation. The first slide showed a timeline of break-ins, with security camera footage clearly showing Michael, Robert, and Margaret entering Helena's home with document scanning equipment. The second slide displayed recorded conversations where the Chen family discussed stealing Helena's business intelligence and destroying her reputation. The third slide revealed financial records showing Michael's payments to Helena's former employees in exchange for confidential information. For the past 10 months, Helena continued, her voice steady and professional, the Chen family has been conducting a coordinated campaign of corporate espionage against Morrison Digital Solutions. They've burglarized my home, bribed my employees, and attempted to steal proprietary business information with the goal of destroying my company and stealing my clients. The screens continued cycling through evidence, photographs of stolen documents, audio recordings of conspiracy planning, financial records showing illegal payments, and video footage of the Chen family's systematic intelligence gathering operation. Every piece of evidence was timestamped, cross-referenced, and professionally documented. Margaret stood frozen beside the podium, her face cycling through expressions of shock, denial, and growing horror as she realized the scope of what Helena had been documenting. Michael and Robert remained at their respective tables, equally paralyzed as they watched their criminal conspiracy being exposed to the entire Millhaven business community. The evidence you're seeing has been provided to the FBI's white-collar crime division, the state attorney general's office, and the local district attorney, Helena continued. Warrants for the arrest of Michael Chen, Robert Chen, and Margaret Chen on charges of burglary, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit fraud will be executed within the next hour. David stood and moved to Helena's side, his presence serving as a powerful visual statement about where his loyalties lay. The man the Chen family had assumed would remain loyal to them regardless of their treatment of his wife was now publicly standing with Helena against his own family. But before law enforcement arrives, Helena said, advancing to her final point, I wanted to give everyone here the opportunity to understand what really happened. The Chen family didn't target Morrison Digital Solutions because of business competition or market opportunity. They targeted it because they couldn't tolerate a daughter-in-law being more successful than they were. Helena clicked to the final slide, which displayed the Chen family's own written communications about their resentment toward her success and their belief that she needed to be put in her place. The evidence was devastating, showing not just criminal behavior but the petty jealousy and familial toxicity that had motivated their crimes. As Helena concluded her presentation and law enforcement officers began entering the ballroom to execute the arrest warrants, Margaret Chen stood beside the podium in complete shock. Her moment of planned triumph had become the catalyst for her family's complete destruction, orchestrated by the woman she'd tried to publicly humiliate. The Chen family had made the fatal mistake of assuming Helena would remain passive and vulnerable. Instead, they'd given her the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly why she'd built a multi-million-dollar business while they'd been reduced to stealing from their own family members. The first arrest happened before Margaret could even leave the podium. Detective Sarah Coleman approached with professional courtesy but unmistakable authority, informing Margaret that she was being taken into custody on charges of burglary, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The handcuffs clicked into place as 200 of Millhaven's business elite watched in stunned silence, many pulling out their phones to record the unprecedented scene of a prominent family matriarch being arrested at the city's most prestigious social event. Michael Chen tried to make a run for the exit but found his path blocked by Detective James Rodriguez, who had been positioned near the ballroom entrance specifically for that possibility. The younger Chen's attempt to flee only made his arrest more dramatic, with security footage from the gala that would later become a viral sensation showing him being tackled near the coat check while prominent business leaders scattered to avoid the commotion. Robert Chen, perhaps recognizing the futility of resistance, remained seated at his table and waited for his turn with the resignation of a man who finally understood he'd been completely outmaneuvered. When Detective Lisa Park approached with the warrant for his arrest, Robert stood with as much dignity as he could muster and submitted to the process without resistance, though his face showed the devastating realization that everything his family had worked to build was crumbling around him. Helena watched the arrests unfold with the calm satisfaction of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan was proceeding exactly as designed. David stood beside her, his arm around her waist, in a gesture of support that sent a clear message to everyone present about where his loyalties lay. The man the Chen family had counted on to remain neutral or even support them against his wife was now publicly demonstrating his complete allegiance to Helena. As law enforcement led the Chen family members away in handcuffs, Helena's phone began receiving the first of what would become an avalanche of calls and messages. The business community's reaction was swift and decisive. Within minutes, Helena was fielding inquiries from potential clients who wanted to distance themselves from any association with Chen Digital Enterprises while positioning themselves favorably with Morrison Digital Solutions. The first call came from James Patterson, CEO of Meridian Financial Group, one of the clients Michael had been aggressively pursuing. Helena, I want you to know that Chen Digital Enterprises approached us last month with proposals that were almost identical to work you'd done for us previously. We were already suspicious about their methods, and after tonight's revelations, we'll be terminating any further discussions with them and would like to expand our relationship with Morrison Digital Solutions. Similar calls followed in rapid succession. Patricia Williams from Quantum Dynamics called to report that Robert Chen had been asking inappropriate questions about their contract with Helena during networking events over the past several months. Thomas Bradley from Pinnacle Tech Solutions revealed that Margaret had been subtly criticizing Helena's work during charity events, attempting to undermine business relationships through social manipulation. What became clear through these calls was that the Chen family's espionage operation had been far more extensive than even Helena had realized. but also far more obvious to the business community than they'd intended. Their attempts at subtlety had been amateur-hour efforts that many clients had already identified as suspicious or inappropriate. Tonight's revelation simply confirmed what many business leaders had already suspected about the Chen family's unethical practices. Helena's documentation of the Chen family's crimes began generating consequences far beyond the immediate arrests. The FBI's investigation, triggered by Helena's comprehensive evidence package, quickly expanded to examine the Chen family's other business dealings. Federal agents discovered that the corporate espionage against Morrison Digital Solutions was part of a broader pattern of unethical business practices that the Chen family had been engaging in for years. Robert Chen's commercial real estate business came under scrutiny when investigators found evidence that he'd been using confidential client information to compete against his own customers for property deals. Margaret's charity work was investigated. After discovering she'd been leveraging non-profit donor lists for her family's business development purposes, Michael's previous ventures were examined, revealing multiple instances where he'd stolen business models and intellectual property from other entrepreneurs. The cascade of legal consequences was devastating. Chen commercial properties faced immediate suspension of their real estate licenses pending investigation of ethical violations. The Millhaven Children's Hospital Board voted to remove Margaret from her leadership position and launch an internal audit of all fundraising activities she'd been involved with. Michael's business registration for Chen Digital Enterprises was revoked due to fraudulent applications that misrepresented the company's capabilities and origins, but the legal consequences were only the beginning of the Chen family's systematic destruction. The social and professional ramifications were perhaps even more devastating. Within hours of the arrests, local news outlets were covering the story of the prominent family brought down by corporate espionage and jealousy. The contrast between Helena's professional success and the Chen family's criminal behavior became a cautionary tale that spread rapidly through business and social networks. The Millhaven Country Club, where the Chen family had been members for over 20 years, initiated proceedings to revoke their membership due to the criminal charges and the negative publicity affecting the club's reputation. The Elmwood Heights Homeowners Association, where the Chen family lived in a mansion that served as a symbol of their success, began discussing whether criminal convictions would constitute grounds for forcing the sale of their property. Helena's strategic timing of the revelations maximized the damage to the Chen family's reputation and business interests. By exposing their crimes at the Chamber of Commerce Gala, she ensured that every significant business leader in Millhaven witnessed their disgrace firsthand. The story spread through professional networks with the speed and devastation of a wildfire, reaching potential clients, business partners, and competitors within hours of the arrests. David's public choice to stand with Helena against his family sent shockwaves through Millhaven's social circles. Friends and acquaintances who had assumed David would maintain family loyalty regardless of circumstances were forced to confront the reality that the Chen family's behavior had been so egregious that even their own son and brother couldn't defend them. David's decision validated Helena's actions and gave social permission for others to distance themselves from the Chen family without appearing disloyal or opportunistic. The financial implications of the Chen family's systematic unraveling were staggering. Chen Commercial Properties lost 3 major development deals within 48 hours as partners sought to avoid association with the scandal. Michael's personal credit was destroyed when banks learned about his criminal charges and revoked his business lines of credit. Margaret's charity positions, which had provided significant social capital and networking opportunities, evaporated as non-profit organizations sought to protect their own reputations. Helena's counter-strategy had anticipated and prepared for each element of the Chen family's destruction. While they'd been focused on stealing her business model, she'd been systematically undermining their ability to compete in the marketplace. While they'd been planning her professional humiliation, she'd been building the evidence that would ensure their complete social and business exile. While they'd been assuming David's family loyalty would protect them from consequences, she'd been helping her husband understand the choice he would eventually need to make. The beauty of Helena's approach was that none of the Chen family's suffering was the result of Helena's direct action. It was the natural consequence of their own criminal behavior being exposed to the light. She hadn't destroyed their business relationships, she'd simply revealed that those relationships were built on deception and theft. She hadn't ruined their social standing, she'd documented their betrayal of family trust and community values. She hadn't turned David against his family. She'd given him the evidence he needed to see them clearly. By the end of the first week following the arrests, the Chen family had lost their business licenses, their social standing, their club memberships, their charitable positions, and their access to the professional networks they'd spent decades building. But Helena knew this was only the beginning of their systematic destruction. The legal proceedings would take months to resolve, during which time the Chen family would face mounting pressure from multiple directions while Helena continued to thrive and grow Morrison Digital Solutions with the support of clients who now understood exactly who they could trust. 3 weeks after the Grandview Ballroom arrests, Helena Morrison-Chen sat in the executive conference room of Pinnacle Legal Group, surrounded by the most powerful attorneys in the state, while across the city the Chen family huddled in the cramped waiting area of the public defender's office, unable to afford private legal representation. The role reversal was so complete that it seemed like a different universe from the one where the Chen family had believed they were orchestrating Helena's destruction. Helena's legal team was led by Catherine Walsh, the state's premier white-collar defense attorney, though in this case Walsh was representing the victim rather than defending criminal charges. Alongside Walsh sat Thomas Hartwell from Morrison and Associates, the business litigation specialist handling Helena's civil claims against the Chen family, and Jennifer Park from Blackstone Intellectual Property Group, who was pursuing criminal referrals for the theft of Helena's proprietary business methods. The meeting was to discuss the Chen family's desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of settlement that would avoid the complete financial and legal annihilation they were facing. Their public defender, Maria Santos, had reached out through back channels to explore whether Helena might be willing to accept some form of compromise rather than pursuing the maximum penalties available under law. They're offering to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for suspended sentences and community service, Walsh reported, reading from the preliminary plea proposal that had been submitted that morning. They're also offering to transfer all assets of Chen Commercial Properties and Chen Digital Enterprises to Morrison Digital Solutions as restitution for damages. Helena listened to the terms with the detached interest of someone reviewing a business proposal that was completely inadequate. The Chen family's offer represented everything they owned, but it was a fraction of what Helena could obtain through the civil litigation process, and it included no personal accountability for the emotional and professional damage their conspiracy had caused. What about the criminal referrals for their former employees and business associates? Helena asked, referring to the dozen people who had been identified as willing participants in the Chen family's espionage operation. Are they willing to provide complete cooperation in prosecuting everyone who assisted their conspiracy? Hartwell consulted his notes before responding. They're willing to provide limited cooperation, but they're asking for immunity from additional charges that might arise from their testimony. Essentially, they want to confess to the crimes we already know about while protecting themselves from anything else we might discover. Helena smiled with the cold calculation of someone who held all the cards in a negotiation. The Chen family was in no position to make demands or set conditions for their surrender. They were facing federal criminal charges that could result in decades of prison time, civil liability that would strip them of every asset they'd ever accumulated, and professional destruction that would prevent them from ever working in business again. Counterproposal, Helena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had completely reversed a power dynamic. They plead guilty to all criminal charges and accept the maximum sentences recommended by prosecutors. They transfer all business assets to Morrison Digital Solutions immediately, not as restitution but as partial payment for damages. They provide complete cooperation in the prosecution of all co-conspirators, including testimony that might expose additional criminal activity. And they sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements that prevent them from ever speaking publicly about this case or about Morrison Digital Solutions. The attorneys exchanged glances, recognizing that Helena's counterproposal was designed not to be accepted but to demonstrate the totality of her victory. She was making it clear that the Chen family would receive no mercy, no compromise, and no opportunity to salvage anything from the wreckage of their criminal conspiracy. Helena, Walsh said carefully, while your position is legally sound, the court might view some leniency favorably, especially given David's testimony about his family's psychological manipulation and the emotional trauma they caused your marriage. Helena's expression didn't change. The court will view favorably the fact that I gave them every opportunity to treat me with respect and dignity as a family member, and they chose instead to commit crimes against me for over 2 years. The court will view favorably the fact that their own son and brother chose to testify against them rather than enable their criminal behavior. The court will view favorably the comprehensive evidence of premeditation and conspiracy that I provided to law enforcement. David entered the conference room carrying coffee for the legal team, his presence serving as a powerful reminder of how completely the family dynamics had shifted. The man the Chen family had assumed would remain loyal to them regardless of their treatment of his wife was now actively participating in their legal destruction, providing testimony and evidence that made their convictions virtually certain. How are they handling the asset seizures? David asked, referring to the court orders that had frozen all Chen family bank accounts and business assets pending the resolution of criminal and civil proceedings. Not well, Hartwell replied. Robert Chen had to sell his golf club membership to pay for groceries. Margaret Chen is living in a studio apartment after the bank foreclosed on the Elmwood Heights mansion. Michael Chen is working as a delivery driver and sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 roommates. The contrast with Helena's current situation was stark. Morrison Digital Solutions had experienced unprecedented growth following the Chen family's arrest, with new clients specifically seeking out Helena's services because of her reputation for ethical business practices and her demonstrated ability to protect confidential information from corporate espionage. Her revenue had increased by 40% in 3 weeks, driven by companies that wanted to associate themselves with integrity rather than criminal behavior. Helena's personal life had also been transformed by the Chen family's destruction. The stress and secrecy of the 10-month investigation period had been replaced by relief and vindication. David's choice to support her against his family had strengthened their marriage in ways that wouldn't have been possible without the crisis. They were planning to start a family, something they delayed while dealing with the Chen family's threats to their business and financial security. There's something else, Jennifer Park said, consulting her tablet. The FBI investigation has uncovered evidence that the Chen family's criminal activity extends far beyond their conspiracy against Morrison Digital Solutions. They're facing additional charges related to tax evasion, money laundering, and fraudulent business practices spanning the past 7 years. Helena wasn't surprised by this revelation. Her investigation had always suggested that the corporate espionage against Morrison Digital Solutions was part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior, not an isolated incident motivated by jealousy. The Chen family's willingness to commit crimes against their own daughter-in-law had indicated a fundamental disregard for legal and ethical boundaries that probably manifested in other areas of their business activities. The additional charges carry minimum sentences that would put all 3 of them in federal prison for at least 15 years, Park continued. Combined with the charges related to your case, they're looking at potential sentences that could keep them incarcerated for the rest of their lives. Helena absorbed this information with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic planning had exceeded even her own expectations. She'd set out to protect her business and hold the Chen family accountable for their corporate espionage. Instead, she triggered a federal investigation that was exposing decades of criminal activity and ensuring that the Chen family would never again be in a position to harm anyone. David sat down beside Helena, reaching for her hand in a gesture that had become natural during the months of legal proceedings. Do you ever feel guilty about how completely this has destroyed them? He asked quietly. Helena considered the question seriously before responding. I feel sad that it was necessary. I feel disappointed that people I cared about were capable of such betrayal and cruelty. But I don't feel guilty about protecting myself and my business from criminals, even when those criminals happen to be family members. She looked around the conference room at the team of attorneys who were ensuring that justice would be served and her business would be protected. The Chen family made a choice to commit crimes against me because they couldn't tolerate my success. They assumed I would be passive and vulnerable because I was a daughter-in-law who wanted to maintain family harmony. They were wrong about who I am and what I'm capable of when someone threatens what I've built. The meeting concluded with Helena's legal team preparing to reject the Chen family's plea proposal and proceed with maximum prosecution on all charges. As they left the conference room, Helena felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had not only survived betrayal but had transformed it into complete victory. The Chen family had spent 2 years planning Helena's destruction and had ended up orchestrating their own annihilation instead. They had taught Helena something valuable about the difference between being kind and being weak, between wanting harmony and accepting abuse, between trusting family and enabling criminals. Helena Morrison-Chen walked out of Pinnacle Legal Group, knowing that she would never again allow anyone to mistake her generosity for vulnerability or her love for weakness. 6 months after the Grandview Ballroom arrests, the final dominoes in the Chen family's destruction were falling with the methodical precision of a controlled demolition. The federal courthouse in downtown Millhaven had become the stage for the most comprehensive white-collar crime prosecution in the state's history, with Helena Morrison-Chen serving as the star witness in a case that had expanded far beyond anyone's initial expectations. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, business leaders, and federal investigators as U.S. Attorney Michael Davidson presented the government's case against the Chen family. What had started as corporate espionage charges against Morrison Digital Solutions had mushroomed into a RICO investigation encompassing 2 decades of criminal enterprise, involving over 30 co-conspirators and affecting hundreds of victims. Across multiple states, Helena sat in the witness section wearing a charcoal gray suit that projected the same professional authority she displayed throughout the ordeal. Beside her, David provided quiet support while taking notes for the victim impact statements he would deliver on behalf of their family. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. where once there had been stress and uncertainty about their future, now there was calm confidence and clear purpose. Judge Patricia Hernandez called the court to order as Margaret Chen was led to the defendant's table in orange prison jumpsuit and shackles. The woman who had once held court at charity galas and country club events now appeared hollow and defeated, aged years beyond the 6 months since her arrest. Her court-appointed attorney, Linda Phillips, looked overwhelmed by the volume of evidence and the severity of charges her client was facing. Mrs. Chen, Judge Hernandez began, you have been found guilty on 47 federal charges including conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Before sentencing, the court will hear victim impact statements from those affected by your criminal enterprise. Helena rose when called, walking to the podium with measured steps. The statement she was about to deliver had been carefully crafted not for emotional impact but for legal precision, ensuring that the court understood the full scope of damage caused by the Chen family's criminal conspiracy. Your Honor, Helena began, her voice clear and authoritative. The Chen family's crimes against Morrison Digital Solutions were not isolated incidents motivated by temporary jealousy. They were systematic attacks on my business, my marriage, my mental health, and my fundamental right to succeed based on merit rather than family politics. She outlined the comprehensive nature of the espionage operation, the psychological manipulation designed to make her doubt her own perceptions, and the deliberate attempts to sabotage her client relationships and professional reputation. But Helena's statement went beyond personal impact to address broader implications for business ethics and family trust. The Chen family's behavior sends a dangerous message that successful women can be targeted and destroyed by family members who feel threatened by their achievements. Their actions represent a form of domestic terrorism within the business community, using intimate knowledge of personal and professional vulnerabilities to inflict maximum damage on victims who trusted them. Judge Hernandez listened intently as Helena described the long-term consequences of the Chen family's crimes. Morrison Digital Solutions had been forced to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in enhanced security measures, legal fees, and employee counseling services. Several major clients had delayed project timelines due to concerns about information security, costing Helena's company millions in potential revenue. But perhaps most significantly, Helena continued, the Chen family's crimes have forever changed how I approach business relationships and family interactions. I can never again assume that people who claim to love and support me are acting in good faith. The trust that makes families and business partnerships possible has been permanently damaged by their betrayal. David's victim impact statement focused on the psychological trauma of discovering his family's capacity for criminal behavior and the ongoing process of rebuilding his identity separate from their influence. He described the guilt of having unknowingly provided them with access to Helena's personal and professional life, and the painful realization that every family interaction for years had been tainted by their ulterior motives. The prosecution's evidence presentation took 3 full days, with FBI agent Sarah Coleman walking the court through the comprehensive investigation that had uncovered the full scope of the Chen family's criminal enterprise. The evidence included over 15,000 pages of documents, hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, financial records spanning 2 decades, and testimony from 43 witnesses across 7 states. Agent Coleman explained how the investigation had revealed that the Chen family's attack on Morrison Digital Solutions was part of a larger pattern of business crimes. They had systematically targeted successful businesses in Millhaven's commercial district, gathering intelligence through social manipulation and using that information to either steal business opportunities or extort favorable deals from competitors. Robert Chen's commercial real estate business had been operating as a criminal enterprise for over 15 years, using confidential client information to compete against his own customers for property deals, manipulating zoning decisions through illegal payments to city officials, and laundering money through shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. Michael Chen's various business ventures had all involved some form of intellectual property theft, with the young man systematically identifying successful entrepreneurs, gathering their proprietary information through deceptive means, and launching competing businesses using stolen methodologies and client lists. His attack on Morrison Digital Solutions was simply the most recent and sophisticated version of a criminal strategy he'd been perfecting for years. Margaret Chen's role in the criminal enterprise involved using her social connections and charity work to gather intelligence about potential targets, manipulate public opinion about competitors, and launder criminal proceeds through fraudulent charitable organizations that existed primarily to provide tax benefits for the family's illegal activities. The scope of the Chen family's criminal enterprise was staggering. Federal investigators had identified over 200 victims across multiple industries, with total damages exceeding $50 million. The investigation had uncovered connections to organized crime families in Chicago and Miami, suggesting that the Chen family had been operating as part of a larger network of white-collar criminals, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Santos presented. The government's sentencing recommendations, which reflected the severity and scope of the crimes. Margaret Chen faced a maximum sentence of 35 years in federal prison, with prosecutors recommending 28 years based on her leadership role in the criminal enterprise and her refusal to cooperate with the investigation. Robert Chen's sentencing hearing had concluded the previous week, resulting in a 32-year federal prison sentence that would likely keep him incarcerated for the rest of his life. At 73 years old, Robert would be over 100 if he lived to complete his sentence, effectively making it a life sentence without the formal designation. Michael Chen had attempted to negotiate a reduced sentence by providing cooperation against other members of the criminal network, but his information had proven unreliable and self-serving. His sentencing was scheduled for the following month, with prosecutors seeking a 25-year sentence that would prevent him from returning to criminal activity until he was in his 50s. The financial restitution requirements were equally devastating. The Chen family had been ordered to pay over $40 million in restitution to their victims, including $8 million specifically to Morrison Digital Solutions for business losses, security costs, and punitive damages. Since the family's legitimate assets totaled less than $3 million, they would likely be in debt to their victims for the rest of their lives. Helena's civil litigation had been even more successful than the criminal prosecution. Her legal team had secured judgments that gave Morrison Digital Solutions ownership of all Chen family business assets, intellectual property, and real estate holdings. The Elmwood Heights mansion, Robert's commercial properties, and Margaret's luxury cars had all been transferred to Helena's company as partial restitution for damages, but perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the consequences cascade was the professional and social destruction that accompanied the legal penalties. Margaret Chen's arrest had triggered investigations by multiple non-profit organizations, resulting in the discovery that she had embezzled over $2 million from children's charities over a 15-year period. Her name had been removed from hospital wings, scholarship funds, and community centers that had once honored her philanthropic contributions. Robert Chen's real estate license had been permanently revoked in 3 states, and professional organizations had expelled him from membership roles dating back decades. His reputation in the commercial development community was so thoroughly destroyed that former business partners were filing their own lawsuits to recover damages from deals they now realized had been tainted by criminal activity. Michael Chen faced professional destruction that would follow him for the rest of his life. Background checks would forever reveal his federal convictions for corporate espionage and fraud, making it virtually impossible for him to find employment in any business or technology role. The young man who had thought he could steal his way to success had ensured that he would never have the opportunity to succeed legitimately. As Judge Hernandez prepared to deliver Margaret Chen's sentence, Helena felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had not only survived betrayal but had transformed it into complete justice. The woman who had tried to humiliate her at the chamber gala was about to spend the next 3 decades in federal prison. While Helena's business had grown stronger and more successful than ever before, the Chen family had taught Helena something valuable about the difference between being a victim and being a survivor, between accepting abuse and demanding justice, between family loyalty and enabling criminal behavior. They had learned, too late, that some people should never be underestimated, especially when they have justice on their side. 2 years after the Grandview Ballroom incident, Helena Morrison-Chen stood in the executive boardroom of Morrison Digital Solutions' new headquarters, a gleaming 20-story tower in downtown Millhaven's business district that bore her name in elegant steel letters across the facade. The company that had once operated from a modest office suite now occupied 4 full floors of the most prestigious commercial address in the city, employing over 200 people and serving clients across 3 continents. The boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city where Helena had built her empire, including a clear sight line to the county courthouse where the Chen family had received their final sentences. But Helena rarely thought about her former in-laws anymore. They had become a chapter in her success story rather than an ongoing concern, their destruction serving as the foundation for something far greater than they could have imagined. David entered the boardroom carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the comfortable smile of a man who had found peace with difficult choices. His transformation over the past 2 years had been as dramatic as Helena's business growth. The conflict with his family had forced him to examine his own values and priorities, ultimately making him a stronger partner and a more independent person. The team from Meridian Ventures is here for the expansion meeting, David said, settling into the chair beside Helena with the easy familiarity of a partnership built on mutual respect and shared triumph over adversity. They're very excited about the international growth projections. Helena nodded, reviewing the presentation materials for what would likely be Morrison Digital Solutions' largest expansion round to date. The company was preparing to open offices in London, Singapore, and Sydney, with projected revenues that would establish Helena as one of the most successful female entrepreneurs in the technology sector. The irony wasn't lost on her that the Chen family's attempt to steal her business had ultimately accelerated its growth beyond anything she'd originally envisioned. The past 2 years had brought changes that extended far beyond business success. Helena and David had welcomed their first child, Emma Chen Morrison, whose hyphenated name represented their decision to honor Helena's entrepreneurial legacy while acknowledging David's choice to stand with his wife against his family's criminal behavior. Emma was now 18 months old, a bright and curious toddler who would grow up knowing that her mother had built something extraordinary through talent, determination, and the courage to fight for what was right. Helena's parenting philosophy had been shaped by her experience with the Chen family. She was determined to raise Emma with strong values about integrity, respect, and the difference between healthy competition and destructive jealousy. Most importantly, Helena wanted her daughter to understand that success should be celebrated rather than resented, and that family should be a source of support rather than a threat to individual achievement. The Chen family's criminal conspiracy had taught Helena valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of protecting what you build. But it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The investigation and prosecution had demonstrated her capacity for strategic thinking under pressure, her ability to document and analyze complex problems, and her willingness to pursue justice even when it meant sacrificing relationships she had valued. Morrison Digital Solutions had become a case study in business schools across the country, not just for its innovative digital marketing strategies but for Helena's handling of corporate espionage and family conflict. Helena had been invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship, business ethics, and the challenges facing women in technology. Her story had inspired other business owners who faced similar threats from family members or competitors who couldn't tolerate their success. The company's growth had allowed Helena to establish the Morrison Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs who were facing family pressure or social obstacles to their business success. The foundation provided legal assistance, business consulting, and emotional support to women whose achievements were being undermined by people who should have been celebrating their accomplishments. Helena's relationship with David had been transformed by their shared experience of confronting his family's betrayal. The crisis had forced them to communicate more openly about difficult topics and had created a level of trust and mutual respect that might not have developed under normal circumstances. David had proven that he could choose love over loyalty to people who didn't deserve it, while Helena had learned to accept support from someone who truly understood the cost of standing up for what was right. The legal proceedings had concluded 6 months earlier with the final civil judgments that transferred the last of the Chen family's assets to Morrison Digital Solutions. Helena now owned the Elmwood Heights mansion where she had once attended Sunday dinners as a hopeful daughter-in-law, though she had converted the property into a residential facility for women entrepreneurs who needed temporary housing while establishing their businesses. Margaret Chen was serving her 28-year federal sentence at FCI Danbury, a minimum security facility where she would likely remain until she was in her 80s. Reports from the prison indicated that Margaret had struggled to adapt to incarceration and had been placed in protective custody after conflicts with other inmates who viewed her crimes against family members as particularly despicable. Robert Chen had died in federal prison 8 months after his sentencing, succumbing to a heart attack that his doctors attributed to the stress of imprisonment and the complete destruction of everything he had spent his life building. Helena had felt no satisfaction in his death, only a sense of closure that justice had been served and that he would never again be in a position to harm anyone. Michael Chen remained incarcerated at FCI Coleman, where he was scheduled to serve another 23 years of his federal sentence. Unlike his parents, Michael had attempted to rebuild his life within the constraints of prison, earning his GED and participating in vocational training programs. Helena had received occasional updates about his progress through the victim notification system, but she felt no obligation to provide forgiveness or support for his rehabilitation efforts. The transformation of Helena's life extended beyond business and family to her broader relationship with success and achievement. The Chen family's criminal conspiracy had taught her that some people would always resent others' accomplishments, but it had also shown her the importance of surrounding herself with people who celebrated rather than undermined her achievements. Helena's executive team at Morrison Digital Solutions included several women who had faced similar challenges from family members or competitors who couldn't tolerate their success. The company had developed a reputation as a place where talent was rewarded regardless of gender, family background, or social expectations, attracting top performers who wanted to work in an environment that valued merit over politics. As Helena prepared for the Meridian Ventures meeting that would finalize Morrison Digital Solutions' international expansion, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had once tried to maintain family harmony by accepting subtle disrespect and casual dismissal of her achievements had become someone who demanded the respect her accomplishments deserved. The Chen family had made the catastrophic mistake of assuming that Helena's kindness was weakness, her desire for family harmony was naivety, and her love for David was a vulnerability they could exploit. Instead, they had discovered that Helena Morrison-Chen was someone who became more dangerous when threatened, more strategic when challenged, and more successful when fighting for what she had built. David joined Helena at the window overlooking downtown Millhaven, their city transformed by Morrison Digital Solutions' presence and success. The company's growth had attracted other technology firms to the area, creating an innovation district that was generating thousands of jobs and millions in economic development. Any regrets? David asked, knowing the answer but understanding Helena's need to occasionally process the magnitude of what they had experienced together. Helena considered the question seriously, as she always did when reflecting on the choices that had defined the past 2 years. I regret that it was necessary, she said finally. I regret that people I cared about were capable of such betrayal. But I don't regret fighting back, and I don't regret winning. She turned from the window to face the conference room where her team was preparing to present expansion plans that would establish Morrison Digital Solutions as a global enterprise. The Chen family taught me something valuable about the difference between being respected and being liked, between earning success and having it handed to you, between building something lasting and trying to steal what others have created. Helena Morrison-Chen walked into that meeting knowing that she had not only survived betrayal but had transformed it into the foundation for unprecedented success. She had learned that sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up teaching you exactly how strong you really are, and that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is simply becoming everything they tried to prevent you from being. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.